You won't believe the moment when a lone figure in a humble military uniform steps into the blinding spotlight of Geneva's grandest hall, silencing centuries of indifference with a single breath. Ibrahim Traoré's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade through silence, demanding answers for golden minds left empty while children sleep on bare earth. His words ignited the air, conjuring the images of Khalifa's last journey for a crumb of bread, Fatu's 3-hour barefoot trek to sit on a splintered bench, and hospitals swallowed by darkness as Lusif fought to breathe. In the front row sat Charles Whitmore, the world's richest mining magnate. He raised a slow, cynical clap, as if misery itself were another deal to broker. The chamber shuddered. The audience held its breath. Traoré stepped off the stage and into the crowd, fire in his eyes. In the next 60 seconds, witnessed the spark that would turn global apathy into a roar for justice. This was not just a speech. It was a reckoning. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if you find power in stories that matter, subscribe to our channel. Geneva's Grand Assembly halls shimmer beneath brilliant beams of light, each spotlight glinting off marble floors and the sleek logos of the global elite. Diplomats in tailored suits murmur beneath the hum of crystal glasses and scripted conversations. At the heart of it all stood a simple podium, bare and unassuming. Then came Ibrahim Traoré, clad in olive fatigues. No medals adorned his chest, yet his presence dwarfed every gold pin in the room. Calm, steady, eyes burning with depth, he approached the podium. Just rows away sat Donald Trump and Charles Whitmore. Whitmore's bespoke suit and gold cufflinks gleamed under the lights, his expression that of someone watching formality, not a threat. He swirled red wine in his glass with idle elegance. Elsewhere, Emily Santos, an unflinching American journalist, tapped her pen in poised readiness. Mark Ellis, humanitarian representative, shuffled his notes. David Turner, Pacific envoy, leaned forward, sensing the shift in gravity. As the last notes of chamber music faded and the spotlight tightened, the room stilled into expectant silence. This would not be a recital of figures and protocols. This was an unveiling. Ibrahim took a breath, stepped forward, and let silence claim the space. His fatigues rustled like thunder in a hushed cathedral. He reached for the mic. No speech, no notes, no teleprompter. Only truth. Mr. Whitmore, he began, his voice steady and rooted in the cadence of dusty roads and candlelit village prayers. You sit here dressed in the world's finest fabrics, sipping the earth's oldest wines. Your name lights up exchanges from London to Joburg. Yet the people whose land you drain cannot afford bread. A pause. A stone dropped into water. Whitmore froze mid-sip. Every gaze in the hall turned. When your companies ship our gold for a fraction of its value, what do our children eat? The silence that followed was absolute. Crystal met wood as Whitmore lowered his glass. Red stained his lower lip, and for the first time, the veneer of power cracked. Trump's brows furrowed. The half-smile faded. Arms once folded now rested on the table. Emily Santos leaned forward. Her pen flew across the page. Mark Ellis lifted his notebook, not for policy, but for raw truth. Turner's knuckles whitened. Traoré looked out at them all. Guilt flickered. Shame surfaced. Our villages empty at dusk, not from war, but from hunger. Our schools lack desks because those who profit from our intellect refuse to build chairs. Our dreams, doctors, engineers, artists, crumble beneath invisible debt. A murmur stirred. Whitmore shifted, cleared his throat, but no rebuttal came. Only the sound of reckoning. If you're watching this while on the go, Traoré's tone softened. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This is not condemnation. This is invitation. The room tensed again, but now with hope. Imagine if just one company, one person, invested not in vaults, but in futures. Imagine one desk lighting 1,000 minds. We do not need handouts. We need dignity. A cough broke the trance. Mark Ellis stood, visibly shaken, and the room, once a monument to inertia, began to shift. The truth had spoken, and no one, not even power itself, could pretend not to hear. Feet shifted beneath velvet-lined chairs. It was the first sign of movement in the stunned assembly. Emily Santos put down her pen. Eyes shimmering with tears, she refused to blink away. Donald Trump, After a moment's hesitation, exhaled sharply and straightened his tie. Even Charles Whitmore pressed his palms against his legs, as though bracing himself for what came next. In that charged stillness, the room seemed to hold its breath, caught between the inertia of tradition and the impulse of change. Traoré stepped back on the microphone, his face serene yet resolute. He had struck the fragile shell of diplomatic indifference, and within the hushed auditorium, a new kind of awareness was taking root. One that would not be satisfied with speeches alone, but demanded concrete action. As the lights dimmed over the podium, the delegates remained seated, uncertain whether to applaud or ruminate in silence. Outside the hall, the hum of Geneva's evening traffic seemed distant, as though the city itself paused to listen. In that moment, a single question, simple, piercing, unavoidable, had cleaved through the polished facade of global discourse, leaving every soul present with a challenge they could no longer ignore. Ibrahim Traoré's voice deepened, carrying the weight of 1,000 untold sorrows. He leaned into the microphone as the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd, so complete it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. Behind him, the projector clicked to life, casting ghostly black and white images onto the screen. Children clustered beneath the shade of a single acacia tree, their thin bodies draped in dust and patched cloth, eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and sorrow. Without pause, Traoré began. When my brother Khalifa was 10 years old, he walked 5 miles at dawn for a single piece of stale bread. His small hands trembled as he reached the bakery, only to find the shelves empty. He turned back, clutching an empty hope in his palm, and never made it home. The image shifted to an empty street at first light, the sun rising on cracked earth. Khalifa's footprints faded into the red dust where no one dared follow. He didn't vanish in a war zone, Traoré continued. He vanished in plain sight. Poverty stole him. A single tear glinted on Emily Sanos's cheek. Even the stoic Mark Ellis bowed his head. The faces around the hall registered shock, disbelief, and compassion, but none more so than Charles Whitmore, who watched with cold detachment as Traoré's words cut through the stillness like a scythe. The little girl named Fatou, Traoré went on, walks to school barefoot for 3 hours, each mile carved into her soul, each pebble a reminder that her future rests on her strength. The video flicked to a makeshift classroom. A cardboard sign nailed to 2 sticks stood in for a blackboard. The only shelter, a tattered tarp whipping in the wind. Fatou sat on a piece of corrugated metal, knees pulled to her chest, coaxing symbols into the air with a stick. She writes fractions on scrap, but because the world cannot provide a single desk, yet she dreams of becoming a doctor, believing that knowledge is the only medicine that can heal the forgotten. A murmur rippled through the audience. David Turner's hand clenched around the armrest. Even Donald Trump, seated with arms crossed, shifted forward, his jaw tightening in unexpected empathy. Traoré's tone grew softer yet more urgent. Then there was CYPH, who shouldered more fear at 5 years old than most men carry in a lifetime. When the generator at the rural hospital failed, he gasped for air as the oxygen machine screamed into silence. I held his small hand as darkness swallowed his cries. The screen went black for a heartbeat, then returned with grainy video. 2 exhausted nurses bending over a crumbling cot, phone flashlights pressed to the tube that was supposed to save a life. CYPH's mother wailed in the corridor, but there were no lights, no power, no answer. At that moment, Whitmore raised his hand, applauding slowly, mockingly. He turned to his aide and whispered, "This tragic theater doesn't affect my bottom line." His words, though hushed, carried clearly through the thick air. A collective gasp rose from the audience. Shock turned to outrage. Emily's pen flew across her notepad, scribbling every syllable. Mark Ellis stood as if propelled by Traoré's stirring plea. Trump's face hardened, then melted into a rare expression of vulnerability. The entire hall seemed to quake with righteous indignation. Traoré let their reaction simmer before speaking again, his voice trembling with controlled anger. "These are not distant stories. They are the heartbeat of my country, the bloodline of our shared humanity. When you strip a land of its gold and send it across oceans, you rob its children of their most basic right, the dignity to live, learn, and dream." He stepped away from the microphone, walking into the front row until he stood before Whitmore. The tycoon's posture stiffened, his eyes darting away. Traoré's gaze bore into him, unwavering. "Mr. Whitmore, you and I share no stage. Yet one truth unites us. A single life lost of hunger or neglect is a wound on the soul of the world. Will you continue to profit in silence, or will you stand with the living?" Silence fell again, but this time it was pregnant with the weight of moral reckoning. The images on the screen lingered: Khalifa's empty street, Fatu's makeshift desk, CYPH's darkened ward. Each frame a testament to suffering engineered by indifference. A trembling hand rose from the back of the room. David Turner's envoy, his voice echoing in the void. "How do we answer their dreams?" he asked. Mark Ellis spoke next. "What can we do right now?" Emily Santos, tears streaming, captured the moment in a sentence she would never forget. "Ibrahim Traoré has stripped our excuses bare." Traoré returned to the podium, chest heaving, eyes blazing with compassion and defiance. "Begin by seeing us," he said. "Invest not with your contracts, but with your hearts. Fund our schools, power our hospitals, and restore what was stolen in broad daylight. The cost of inaction is not just measured in dollars. It is paid in lost lives, broken spirits, and the quiet death of hope." The room erupted in applause, not the polite, restrained claps of protocol, but a thunderous ovation of conviction. Even Whitmore could not suppress a hesitant standing ovation, though his eyes flicked nervously to his aides. Donald Trump rose to his feet, nodding solemnly, his face shadowed by reflection. As the ovation swelled, Traoré stepped back, his uniform illuminated by the spotlight, a lone sentinel standing between the darkness of neglect and the dawning of a new pledge. In that charged moment, the hall ceased to be a place of detached diplomacy. It became a crucible of conscience, forging a promise that would echo far beyond its ornate walls, that the forgotten would no longer be silenced, and that every life, no matter how humble, was worth fighting for. Ibrahim Traoré's hand hovered for a moment over the microphone, the final echo of his last words still hanging in the air like a held breath. Then, with a fluid motion that seemed both practiced and urgent, he released the mic, its metal arm clattering softly as he stepped off the podium. The polished floor reflected his olive green fatigues, but his eyes were fixed only on a man seated in the front row. Charles Whitmore's tailored suit and gleaming cufflinks stood in stark contrast to Traoré's simple uniform. Yet in that instant, they felt equally exposed. Traoré walked down the aisle with unexpected grace, each footfall measured as though he were traversing the steps of a cathedral. The global elite watched in stunned silence. Donald Trump leaned forward, elbows on knees, his gaze sharpening. The soft hum of the air conditioning gave way to the thumping of Traoré's heartbeat, felt only by those attuned to the tension. When he reached Whitmore's seat, Traoré paused, so close he could have counted the gold veins of the tycoon's cufflinks. His voice, ordinarily measured and controlled, brimmed now with a raw insistence. "Mr. Whitmore," he began, barely above a whisper, yet so piercing it seemed to crack the veneer of diplomacy. "The child who sleeps on cold dirt, does he not deserve the dignity of a life worth living? Is he not a human being like you?" Whitmore's composure faltered. He turned his head, his lips parted in offer of some carefully crafted response. But no words came. His eyes flickered momentarily toward the exit, then downward to the polished floor. In that flicker, the audience of organizing a book drive, volunteers taped homemade books for Fatu labels on cardboard boxes across U.S. schools, libraries, and community centers. It honored the little girl whose story had pierced global apathy. In Washington, D.C., Mark Ellis of the Humanitarian Fund watched in awe as website traffic spiked overnight and individual donations poured in, driven by emotion and Ibrahim Traoré's powerful plea. Within days, Mark had coordinated emergency grants to power rural clinics, supplied textbooks to underfunded schools, and delivered art kits and clean water to villages, all framed as a tribute to Traoré Speaks for Us. In a live interview on a national news network, Mark looked directly into the camera. "This is not charity, it's justice. We have the means to restore dignity. And now, with the world behind this movement, we will." Meanwhile, David Turner, the envoy from the Pacific, eyed a surge of solidarity from halfway around the globe. He sent an urgent dispatch to his government, urging the reallocation of overseas aid toward African rural development. His report included screenshots of solidarity rallies in Hawaii and Suva, communities holding candles and posters quoting Traoré. Leadership is found in the heart at the bottom of society. As David wrote, he reached our island families, those who weather storms and rising seas, and reminded us that investment in human resilience is the truest measure of progress. Across more than 20 countries, the hashtag #TraorSpeaksForYous trended wildly. Social media timelines became mosaics of solidarity. Faces holding homemade signs reading, "Dignity is non-negotiable." In Rio de Janeiro, a street mural of Traoré's silhouette mirrored the Christ the Redeemer statue. In Johannesburg, a local artist spray-painted "Dreamers of the Mother Continent," a tribute to the eloquent, unbowed generation Traoré represented. Even mainstream media surged forward. Morning shows dedicated segments to unpacking his speech's global impact. Opinion editors on the front pages demanded corporate boards heed the call for ethical investments. Editorial cartoons portrayed Charles Whitmore clutching gold bars as his eyes finally opened to the suffering he'd helped export. Back in Washington, congressional aides circulated clips of Trump's brief but unmistakable nod during Traoré's speech, reigniting debate over whether it signaled a shift in U.S. conscience. Across cable networks, pundits replayed that single moment of acknowledgement. For many viewers, it was proof that even the most hardened power broker couldn't ignore the force of one man's courage. From a modest office in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré watched the whirlwind unfold. A single laptop connected him to a global storm of gratitude, outrage, and resolve. Thousands of messages flooded in, from strangers, educators, frontline workers, even CEOs, thanking him for saying what others fear to speak. He was invited to speak at world forums, offered honorary degrees, and approached by global institutions eager to fund educational and medical partnerships. But amid the thunder of digital solidarity, Traoré's focus never wavered. Transform viral sentiment into visible change. By the time the sun set over Geneva, the once silent Grand Hall stood empty, but the world it had stirred was wide awake. The phrase "Traoré speaks for us" had evolved beyond a hashtag. It had become a reckoning, a promise. From senior centers in Chicago to student dorms in Atlanta, from radio booths in Nairobi to underground poetry circles in Paris, African descendants and allies found in his words a mirror of their long unheard cries. To be recognized, to be invested in, to be free from the global margins. This movement wasn't propelled by governments or billionaires. It surged forward powered by the raw, undeniable truth. Every human life deserves the world's full attention. Then, like a distant drumbeat, devastating news broke. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake had struck eastern Burkina Faso. Coordinates were whispered into Traoré's ear while still in Geneva. The death toll was rising by the minute. Without ceremony, he peeled off his formal jacket, sprinted to the conference center, and boarded the first available flight home. By dawn, he was in the dust of his homeland, sleeves rolled, boots sunk in the cracked red earth. No podium, no press, just rubble and cries. With his bare hands, he lifted beams, cleared debris, and pulled survivors from the ruins. Geneva's crisp white linens were gone. The air here was humid, thick with grief and resolve. Each grain of dust on his skin whispered of broken promises. Each life he helped save was louder than 1,000 speeches. In a makeshift command center hundreds of miles away, Charles Whitmore watched silently through a glass wall. The Ares mining boardroom, once a sanctuary of power, now reflected the faces of mothers weeping, children rescued, and fields torn apart. For years, he had known Burkina Faso only as a profit line. Now, the burden of every ounce of gold exported weighed visibly on his face. His reflection, cast against the images of real suffering, looked older, uncertain, haunted. Then the world saw it. Traoré emerged from the rubble, cradling a dust-covered child wrapped in a frayed blanket. The boy's eyes, wide with fear and fragile hope, locked onto the face of the man who had not come to speak, but to save. A camera, capturing the moment from a rooftop, beamed it across the globe. Social feeds exploded. News anchors choked on their scripts. That image, the child in Traoré's arms, became the new face of global compassion. In Geneva, The story had been one of conscience. As images from the earthquake zone flooded international screens, the world that had once paused to listen now moved to act. In Brazil, volunteers painted murals across school walls, Fatu silhouette beside the words, "Dreams deserve desks." In South Africa, community builders laid the foundation for what they called the Khalifa School of Resilience, a tribute to the boy whose footprints had disappeared into red dust. In Japan, solar companies offered grants for powering rural clinics after seeing images of makeshift hospitals lit only by phone flashlights. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Mark Ellis stood before a bipartisan congressional committee holding up a photo of a Burkinabe nurse holding a child under candlelight. "This," he said, voice cracking, "is what happens when our policies care more about commodities than communities." The chamber fell silent before applause broke, unexpected and unanimous. That same week, 3 new bills were introduced in Congress, proposing that all international trade agreements include enforceable human dignity benchmarks, not as charity, but as equity. Traoré clauses. They came to be called in policy circles. In Geneva, the once-forgotten hall now served as the base for a new coalition for ethical development, co-chaired by delegates from the Global South. David Turner, envoy of the Pacific Islands, stood before the coalition's first assembly and declared, "Leadership has returned to the people, and it wears boots, not brogues." Across 22 nations, rallies bloomed organically. Hashtag Traoré Speaks For Us, no longer a mere slogan but a demand. Invest in life, not just profit. Student in Brooklyn ran book drives labeled Books for Fatu. Radio DJs in Lagos replaced hourly news with updates on Burkina Faso's rebuilding. Instagram influencers in Europe offered their platforms to African grassroots organizers, giving up brand deals to raise awareness. Even members of the UN General Assembly interrupted protocol to pass a resolution recognizing Ibrahim Traoré's speech and earthquake response as a humanitarian turning point. But while the world echoed his message, Traoré never stopped working. His boots stayed caked in dust. His hands remained calloused from digging. When asked why he hadn't returned to the world stage to speak again, his only answer was, "They don't need another speech. They need electricity. They need schools." He coordinated with rural engineers to bring microgrids to clinics. He worked with teachers to build classrooms out of local clay, sustainable and strong. Every night, he returned to a modest room in a relief tent, surrounded by maps, supply lists, and letters from school children. One in crayon simply said, "You made me feel seen." And somewhere in a tall glass building, Charles Whitmore, the once detached mining magnate, no longer held shareholder calls with the same cool calculation. He had donated, quietly, anonymously, to trauma wards in the quake zone. He had begun divesting from exploitative ventures. And though he never spoke publicly again, insiders say he started carrying in his wallet a photograph, a dirt-covered child in the arms of a soldier. As the dust settled and rebuilding began, a truth emerged, etched in brick, spoken in every language. True leadership is not declared in press conferences. It is proven in crisis. The screen fades. Words appear. Donate. Volunteer. Share. Stand. This is the moment before the world changes. Be part of the story. Here, it became one of action.